The dust swirled around her boots as Sarah Beth stepped down from the stagecoach in Quartz Hill, California, and the whispers started before her feet even touched the ground. Her left leg dragged slightly, the limp pronounced after hours of cramped travel, and she heard the words she had heard 1,000 times before, spoken by people who thought she could not hear or did not care if she did. She kept her chin high, her green eyes fixed on the wooden boardwalk ahead, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. It was 1878, and this mining town in the California hills was supposed to be her fresh start, the place where she could finally leave behind the pitying glances and cruel jokes that had followed her since the accident 5 years ago. She had a job waiting at the general store, a small room above the millinery shop, and a determination forged in steel to prove that she was more than the sum of her limitations. The September heat pressed down on the town like a heavy blanket, making the air shimmer above the dirt street. Sarah adjusted her traveling bag on her shoulder and started toward the boarding house, where she was supposed to meet Mrs. Henderson, the woman who owned the millinery shop. Each step sent a dull ache through her hip, a reminder of the day the wagon had overturned and crushed her leg beneath its weight. The doctors had wanted to amputate, but her father had found one physician willing to try to save it. She had kept her leg, but it would never be the same, shorter now by 2 inches and twisted at an angle that made walking a constant challenge. "Did you see that?" A woman's voice carried from the shade of the mercantile porch. "Poor thing. Wonder what happened to her." "Probably born that way," another voice replied, thick with false sympathy. "My sister had a cousin like that, never did find a husband." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse, that the kindest thing she could do for herself was to pretend she existed in a world separate from their judgment. The boardwalk creaked under her uneven gait, and she focused on the rhythm of her steps, the way she had trained herself to move with as much grace as possible given the circumstances. The general store loomed ahead, its false front promising goods from San Francisco and beyond. She was meant to start work there tomorrow, keeping the books and managing inventory. The owner, Mr. Prescott, had hired her based on her letters of reference alone, never having seen her in person. Sarah wondered how long it would take before he regretted his decision, before he decided that having a crippled woman in his store was bad for business. She was so lost in her thoughts that she did not notice the commotion up ahead until she was nearly upon it. A group of men had gathered in front of the saloon, their voices raised in anger and excitement. Sarah slowed her pace, instinct telling her to give the crowd a wide berth, but the boardwalk was narrow, and the alternative was stepping down into the dusty street. "You cheated, and everybody here knows it," a man shouted, his face red with rage and whiskey. He was dressed in the fine clothes of a gambler, his vest embroidered with silver thread that caught the sunlight. "I won fair and square," another voice replied, this one calmer but edged with steel. "You are just a sore loser, Dalton." Sarah tried to slip past the crowd, keeping close to the storefronts, but her foot caught on an uneven board and she stumbled. Her bag fell from her shoulder, spilling its contents across the wooden planks. Mortified, she dropped to her knees to gather her belongings, her face burning with humiliation as people turned to stare. "Well, well," the gambler's voice cut through the noise. "Looks like we got ourselves some entertainment." Sarah's hands moved faster, shoving her spare dress and personal items back into the bag. She could feel the weight of all those eyes on her, could hear the snickers and whispers starting up again. Her fingers fumbled with a silver locket that had belonged to her mother, the chain tangled around a hairbrush. "Leave her be, Dalton." The second voice was closer now, and Sarah glanced up to see a man unlike any she had encountered before. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back with a strip of leather, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into planes and angles that spoke of a life lived outdoors. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a startling shade of gray that seemed to see right through her defenses. He wore buckskin trousers and a homespun shirt that stretched tight across a chest heavy with muscle, and there was a Bowie knife strapped to his belt alongside a well-worn Colt revolver. "I ain't talking to her," Dalton said with a nasty laugh. "Just observing the local scenery." The big man's expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle coiling of muscle that made him seem suddenly dangerous despite his stillness. "I said leave her be." Sarah finally got her belongings back into her bag and struggled to her feet, her cheeks still flaming. She wanted nothing more than to disappear, to be anywhere but the center of this unwanted attention. She mumbled a quiet thank you in the direction of the big man and started to move away, but Dalton was not finished. "Look at her go," he called out, his voice thick with mockery. "Hobbling along like a 3-legged dog. Somebody ought to put her out of her misery." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each one finding the soft places inside her that she tried so hard to protect. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed, and she focused all her energy on putting one foot in front of the other, on getting away from this place and these people. She heard the meaty sound of fist meeting flesh, followed by a heavy thud and shouts of surprise. Against her better judgment, Sarah turned back to see Dalton sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose, and the big man standing over him with his fists still clenched. "You broke my nose," Dalton sputtered, his refined accent slipping into something cruder. "You will pay for this, Quinn." "Then add it to what you already owe me from cards," the big man said calmly. He turned away from Dalton as if the gambler was no longer worth his attention and walked toward Sarah. She froze, uncertain whether she should flee or stand her ground, but her leg was aching fiercely now and she was not sure she could manage either with any dignity. Up close, the man called Quinn was even more imposing, all hard muscle and controlled strength. But his eyes were kind when they met hers, and his voice was gentle when he spoke. "Are you all right, miss?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. She was acutely aware of how she must look to him, dusty from travel, her limp more pronounced than ever from the exertion, her composure shattered by the events of the last few minutes. "My name is Gideon Quinn," he said, as if they were meeting under normal circumstances at a church social. "Most folks around here just call me Quinn, or the Mountain Man, on account of I spend most of my time up in the high country trapping and hunting." "Sarah Beth," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah Beth Bryant. I just arrived on the stage. Welcome to Quartz Hill, Miss Bryant." He glanced back at Dalton, who was being helped to his feet by his companions, all of them shooting dark looks in Quinn's direction. "I apologize for that unpleasantness. Some men never learned proper manners." Sarah found herself studying Gideon Quinn with a curiosity that surprised her. He seemed utterly out of place here in town, like a wild creature that had wandered down from the mountains. There was something untamed about him, a quality that had nothing to do with his buckskin clothing or his long hair and everything to do with the way he held himself, alert and watchful. "Thank you for intervening," Sarah said, finding her voice. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did." His answer was simple, stated as fact rather than opinion. A man who mocks someone for circumstances beyond their control is no man at all. He is a coward and a bully, and both types need to be put in their place now and again. Something warm bloomed in Sarah's chest, a feeling she could not quite name. She was accustomed to pity, to people treating her like a fragile thing made of glass, but there was none of that in Gideon Quinn's manner. He had defended her not because he felt sorry for her, but because what Dalton had done was wrong. It was a subtle distinction, but it made all the difference in the world. "I should let you get to wherever you were heading," Gideon said, stepping back to give her space. "But if you need anything while you are settling in, I am staying at the boarding house at the end of the street. The one with the green shutters." "I am supposed to be staying there too," Sarah said, surprised by the coincidence. "Above the millinery shop next door." A smile transformed Gideon's face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger than she had first thought. He could not be more than 27 or 28, she realized, only a handful of years older than her own 23. "Then I suppose we will be neighbors, Miss Bryant. May I walk you there? These streets can be rough and your bag looks heavy." Pride warred with practicality in Sarah's mind. She wanted to refuse, to prove that she could manage on her own, but her leg was throbbing and she still had 3 more blocks to navigate. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Quinn." "Just Quinn," he corrected, reaching for her bag. His hand brushed hers as he took it, and Sarah felt a strange flutter in her stomach that she firmly told herself was just nerves from the confrontation. They walked together down the boardwalk, Gideon shortening his long stride to match her slower pace without making it obvious that he was doing so. Sarah appreciated the consideration more than she could say. Most people either rushed ahead, impatient with her limitations, or walked too slowly beside her, their patience a form of condescension that made her skin crawl. "What brings you to Quartz Hill?" Gideon asked as they walked. "We do not get many new arrivals this late in the season." "A job," Sarah replied. "I am going to be keeping the books at Prescott's general store. I have a head for numbers, and Mr. Prescott needed someone with experience in accounting." "Prescott's a good man," Gideon said with an approving nod. "Fair in his dealings, which is more than can be said for some merchants. You will do well there." "I hope so." Sarah watched her feet as she navigated around a loose board. "I need this position to work out. I do not have many other options." She had not meant to say that last part, had not intended to reveal any weakness, but something about Gideon Quinn made her feel safe enough to be honest. He did not respond immediately, seeming to consider his words carefully before speaking. "Everybody's got their own struggles," he said finally. "The good Lord gives us challenges to overcome, not to define us. Seems to me you have already overcome plenty, Miss Bryant, coming all this way to a new place, starting fresh. That takes more courage than most folks can muster." Sarah blinked rapidly, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill over. When was the last time someone had called her courageous? When had anyone seen past her limp to the person beneath? "You do not know anything about me," she said, but there was no heat in the words, only wonder. "I know you did not let Dalton's cruelty break you," Gideon said. "I know you got right back up when you stumbled and kept going. I know you have kind eyes and a stubborn chin, which tells me you have got strength and determination in equal measure. That is enough to know you are someone worth knowing." They had reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure painted white with green shutters just as Gideon had described. The millinery shop was attached to one side, its window display showing an array of bonnets and hats in various styles. Mrs. Henderson must have been watching for her arrival because the door opened before they reached it, and a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile stepped out onto the porch. "You must be Miss Bryant," she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. "We have been expecting you." Come in, come in." The stage was supposed to arrive hours ago. "There was a problem with one of the wheels," Sarah explained. "We had to stop for repairs." Mrs. Henderson's eyes moved to Gideon and her expression shifted to something knowing and pleased. "I see you have met our Mr. Quinn. He is one of our most interesting residents, though we do not get to see him nearly enough. Always running off to the mountains, he is." "I was just helping Miss Bryant with her bag," Gideon said, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "Ran into a bit of trouble in town. Dalton, Mrs. Henderson's expression soured. "That man is a plague on this community. Someone needs to run him out of town before he causes real harm." "He will not be bothering Miss Bryant again," Gideon said with quiet certainty, and Sarah felt that strange flutter in her stomach once more. Mrs. Henderson ushered Sarah inside, taking over from Gideon with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been caring for boarders for decades. The interior of the shop was cool and dim after the bright sunshine, and Sarah's eyes took a moment to adjust. When they did, she found Gideon still standing in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. "Thank you again," Sarah said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "For everything. It was my pleasure, Miss Bryant." Gideon touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and endearing. "I am sure I will see you around." Then he was gone, his heavy footsteps fading as he walked away, and Sarah found herself staring at the empty doorway like a fool. "That is a good man, Mrs. Henderson said softly, startling Sarah out of her reverie. "Rough around the edges, perhaps, and more comfortable in the wilderness than in polite society, but good all the way through. He has been staying here off and on for 3 years now, whenever he comes down from the mountains to sell his furs and replenish his supplies. Never any trouble, always pays on time, and I have seen him help more than one person in need." Sarah followed Mrs. Henderson up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room that overlooked the street. It was simply furnished with a bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a chair by the window. After sharing a cramped space with her 2 younger sisters back in Ohio, it felt like a palace. "Supper is at 6, Mrs. Henderson said, setting Sarah's bag on the bed. "We eat family style in the dining room downstairs. There are 4 other boarders at the moment, all respectable people. Mr. Quinn, of course, a school teacher named Miss Peters, a bank clerk named Mr. Wilson, and a widow lady, Mrs. Carmichael, who is visiting her daughter. You will meet them all tonight." After Mrs. Henderson left, Sarah sank down onto the bed and let out a long breath. The room was quiet except for the distant sounds of the town going about its business, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something like peace settle over her. She had made it. She was here, in Quartz Hill, with a job and a place to stay and the promise of a fresh start. And she had met Gideon Quinn. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. She could see people going about their errands, horses tied to hitching posts, a dog sleeping in a patch of shade. It was an ordinary scene in an ordinary town, but it felt extraordinary because it was hers now, her new life, her new beginning. She thought about the way Gideon had looked at her, really looked at her, not at her limp or her limitation, but at her. She thought about his words, about courage and strength and being worth knowing. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way before, as if she was a whole person rather than a broken one. Sarah touched her fingers to the window glass, tracing the outline of a cloud in the distance. She had come to Quartz Hill looking for independence, for the chance to prove herself on her own terms. She had not come looking for anything else, had certainly not come looking for a mountain man with kind eyes and a protective streak. But life, Sarah was beginning to learn, had a way of giving you what you needed rather than what you expected. The afternoon passed quickly as Sarah unpacked her belongings and made the room her own. She hung her 2 dresses in the wardrobe, arranged her few personal items on the washstand, and placed her mother's silver locket carefully in the top drawer. By the time the dinner bell rang at 6 o'clock, she felt more settled than she had in months. The dining room was on the first floor, a large space with a table that could seat a dozen people. 5 places were set tonight, and Sarah saw that she was the last to arrive. Gideon Quinn sat at the far end of the table, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt with his hair still damp from washing. The other boarders Mrs. Henderson had mentioned were there as well, and they all looked up as Sarah entered. "Miss Bryant." Mrs. Henderson bustled in from the kitchen carrying a platter of roasted chicken. "Come sit down, dear. Let me introduce everyone. This is Miss Abigail Peters, our schoolteacher." A young woman with dark hair and intelligent eyes smiled at Sarah from across the table. "Welcome to Quartz Hill, Miss Bryant. I hope you will find it as agreeable as I have." "Mr. Harold Wilson from the bank, Mrs. Henderson continued, indicating a thin man with spectacles who nodded politely. "And Mrs. Dorothy Carmichael, who is visiting from Sacramento." The older woman offered a kind smile. "How lovely to have another young lady in residence. We are quite outnumbered by the gentlemen." "And of course you have already met Mr. Quinn," Mrs. Henderson finished, setting the platter on the table. "We have," Gideon confirmed, his gray eyes meeting Sarah's across the table. "Miss Bryant had quite an introduction to our town this afternoon." "Oh dear," Miss Peters said, her expression concerned. "I hope it was nothing too distressing." Sarah took her seat, which happened to be directly across from Gideon. "Just a misunderstanding," she said diplomatically. "Mr. Quinn was kind enough to assist me." "That sounds like Quinn," Mr. Wilson said with an approving nod. "Always the gentleman despite his fearsome reputation." "Fearsome?" Sarah could not help but ask, looking at Gideon with new curiosity. The mountain man shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "People tend to exaggerate," he muttered. "Nonsense," Mrs. Carmichael said cheerfully as she passed the chicken platter. "You saved 3 children from a bear last spring, and you tracked down those horse thieves when the sheriff was too afraid to go after them." "That is not exaggeration, that is fact." Sarah found herself reassessing the man across from her. She had seen his strength and his kindness, but she was beginning to understand there was much more to Gideon Quinn than she had initially realized. The meal proceeded with comfortable conversation, the other boarders asking Sarah polite questions about her journey and her background. She kept her answers brief, not wanting to delve into the painful circumstances that had led her to leave Ohio, but everyone seemed to accept her reticence with understanding. Gideon said little during dinner, but Sarah noticed that his eyes kept finding her across the table. Each time their gazes met, she felt that same flutter in her stomach, that same inexplicable sense of connection. It was ridiculous, she told herself. She had known this man for all of 3 hours. She could not possibly be developing feelings for him. But when dinner ended and the boarders began to disperse to their various evening activities, Sarah found herself hoping that Gideon would seek her out, that he would find some reason to speak with her again. She was not disappointed. "Miss Bryant," Gideon's deep voice came from behind her as she started toward the stairs. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk. The evenings here are beautiful, and there is a path along the creek that is quite lovely in the fading light." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. A walk would be difficult for her, especially after the long day of travel and the constant strain on her leg. But the thought of spending more time with Gideon Quinn was too appealing to resist. "I would like that," she heard herself say. They stepped out into the cooling evening air, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun sank behind the distant mountains. True to his word, Gideon led her to a path that followed a narrow creek, the water chattering over smooth stones as it made its way down from the high country. Gideon walked beside her, patient and unhurried, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the rhythm of their steps. The path was smooth and well-maintained, easier to navigate than the uneven boardwalks in town, and her leg did not ache quite as fiercely as it had earlier. "How did you come to be a mountain man?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this man who seemed to exist outside the normal boundaries of society. Gideon was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the path ahead. "I grew up in Missouri," he said finally. "My father was a farmer, wanted me to take over the land when he passed. But I never felt right there, never felt like I fit into that life. When I was 20, I joined up with a fur trapping expedition heading into the Rockies, and I found what I had been looking for. The mountains, the wilderness, the freedom of it. I have been living that life ever since, coming down to towns like this only when I need to trade or resupply." "Do you ever get lonely?" Sarah asked softly. "Sometimes," Gideon admitted. "But loneliness in the wilderness is different from loneliness in a crowd. At least in the mountains, I am alone by choice. In towns, surrounded by people, I felt alone because I was different, because I did not fit their expectations of who and what I should be." Sarah understood that feeling all too well. "I know what you mean," she said. "After my accident, I was surrounded by family and friends, but I felt completely isolated. They all saw me differently, treated me differently. I became the girl with the limp, the one who needed help, the one to be pitied. That is why I came here, to a place where nobody knows my history, where I can be just Sarah instead of poor Sarah." Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression intense. "You are not poor Sarah. You are brave Sarah, strong Sarah, beautiful Sarah." The word beautiful hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt her breath catch in her throat. Nobody had ever called her beautiful before, especially not since the accident. She had accepted long ago that romance and courtship were not meant for women like her, that she would live her life alone and make her peace with it. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Gideon said firmly. "I know that you did not let Dalton's cruelty crush your spirit. I know that you traveled across the country alone to chase a dream. I know that you have a smile that lights up your whole face, even though I have only seen it once. I know that when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth protecting, worth caring about." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you see me that way when everyone else sees only my limitation?" Gideon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently touched her cheek. His hand was calloused and rough from years of hard living, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Because I look at you, not at your leg. Because I see your courage, not your limp. Because when I watch you walk, I do not see someone struggling. I see someone who refuses to give up, who keeps moving forward no matter what obstacles stand in her way. That is not a limitation, Sarah. That is strength." Without thinking, Sarah reached up and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. "They all said I walk with a limp," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Back home, in every town I pass through, here in Quartz Hill. They point it out as if I do not already know, as if it is the most important thing about me." "You might walk with a limp," Gideon said, his gray eyes locked on hers, "but you walk straight into my heart." The words broke something open inside Sarah, some wall she had built to protect herself from hope and disappointment. She had known this man for mere hours, but in that time he had seen her more clearly than people who had known her all her life. He had defended her, supported her, and now he stood before her offering something she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Gideon," she breathed, and she saw him react to the sound of his name on her lips, saw something fierce and tender flash across his face. "I know it is too soon," he said roughly. I know I should not be saying these things to you, that you just arrived and you barely know me. But I have learned in my life that when you find something real, something true, you do not let it slip away just because the timing is not perfect. I felt something when I saw you today, Sarah. Something I have never felt before, and I hope, that maybe you felt it too. Sarah's heart was racing so fast she could barely breathe. Every rational part of her mind was screaming that this was madness, that she could not possibly be falling for a man she had just met, that she should be cautious and sensible and protect her heart. But her heart was not listening to reason. Her heart recognized something in Gideon Quinn, some fundamental rightness that transcended logic and time. I felt it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel it, and it terrifies me. Why? Gideon asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her cheek. Because I could lose it, Sarah said honestly. Because you could wake up tomorrow and realize you made a mistake, that I am not what you thought I was. Because everyone always leaves eventually, and I do not know if I could bear it if you did too. Gideon's expression softened with understanding. I cannot promise you the future, he said. Nobody can, but I can promise you this. I do not make mistakes about people. When I commit to something, I see it through. And I have already committed to you, Sarah Bryant, even if you do not want me. Even if you tell me right now that you do not feel the same way, that you want me to leave you alone, I will still be here if you need me. I will still defend you, protect you, care about you. That is who I am, and that is what you mean to me already. The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction, made Sarah believe him in a way she had never believed anyone before. Here was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. I do not want you to leave me alone, Sarah said, making her own leap of faith. I want to know you better. I want to spend time with you. I want to see if this feeling between us is real or just a moment of madness brought on by an eventful day. Gideon's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. Then that is what we will do, he said. I am in town for 2 more weeks before I head back to my cabin for the winter. Let us spend that time getting to know each other, and then we can decide what comes next. 2 weeks. It seemed like both an eternity and no time at all. Sarah nodded, committing herself to this path even though she had no idea where it would lead. 2 weeks, she agreed. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence, and when they parted at the bottom of the stairs, Gideon took her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles that sent shivers racing up her arm. "Good night, Sarah," he said, and the sound of her name in his deep voice was the sweetest thing she had ever heard. "Good night, Gideon," she replied, and she climbed the stairs to her room feeling like she was floating. Sarah started her job at Prescott's General Store the next morning, and to her relief, Mr. Prescott turned out to be exactly as Gideon had described him. Fair, honest, and utterly unconcerned with her limp. He showed her the account books and the inventory system, explained his expectations, and left her to her work with complete confidence in her abilities. The store was busy, a constant stream of customers coming in for everything from flour and coffee to fabric and tools. Sarah worked in a small office at the back, away from the public eye, which suited her perfectly. She could hear the chatter and bustle of commerce, could smell the mix of coffee and tobacco and leather that pervaded the store, but she did not have to endure the stares and whispers that always seemed to follow her in public spaces. She had been working for about 2 hours when the bell above the door chimed, and she heard a familiar deep voice asking Mr. Prescott about some supplies. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and before she could think better of it, she was standing and walking to the doorway of her office. Gideon stood at the counter with a list in his hand, wearing the same buckskin trousers and homespun shirt from the day before. He looked utterly out of place among the neat shelves and civilized goods, like a wolf that had wandered into a parlor. But when he saw Sarah, his whole face lit up with pleasure. "Miss Bryant," he said, his voice warm, "I did not know you would be starting today." "Mr. Prescott wanted me to begin right away," Sarah replied, very aware of the interested looks both the shopkeeper and the other customers were giving them. "There is quite a bit of work to catch up on." "I am sure you will have everything organized in no time," Gideon said with complete confidence. He turned back to Mr. Prescott. "I need the items on this list, if you have them in stock." Sarah retreated to her office, but she could not help listening to Gideon's transaction, could not help smiling at the polite way he interacted with Mr. Prescott. For all his rough exterior and wilderness ways, he had impeccable manners when he chose to use them. A few minutes later, Gideon appeared in her doorway, a wrapped package under his arm. "I am heading out to do some hunting this afternoon," he said, "but I was wondering if you might like to have lunch with me before I go. There is a decent restaurant on Main Street, and they make an excellent pot roast." Sarah glanced at Mr. Prescott, who nodded his approval. "You are entitled to an hour for lunch, Miss Bryant. Go and enjoy yourself." The restaurant was small and clean, with checkered tablecloths and curtains on the windows. The proprietress, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Flynn, greeted Gideon like an old friend and showed them to a quiet table in the corner. Over plates of pot roast and potatoes, they talked. Gideon told her about his life in the mountains, about tracking elk through deep snow and camping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. He spoke of the isolation and the beauty, the danger and the peace, painting a picture of a life so different from anything Sarah had known that it might as well have been a foreign country. In turn, Sarah told him about growing up in Ohio, about her father's dry goods store and her mother's garden, about her two younger sisters who were both married now with children of their own. She told him about the accident that had changed everything, about the months of pain and rehabilitation, about the slow realization that her life would never return to what it had been before. "You miss them?" Gideon asked gently. "Your family?" "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But things were different after the accident. They loved me, but they treated me like I was made of glass, like I might shatter if they were not constantly careful with me. My mother wanted me to stay home forever, safe and protected. My father agreed with her. They could not understand why I needed to leave, why I needed to prove that I could still have a life of my own. They were afraid," Gideon said. "Fear makes people hold on too tight sometimes." "I know," Sarah said, "but I could not breathe there anymore. I had to leave, even if it meant being alone." Gideon reached across the table and took her hand, his large fingers engulfing hers. "You are not alone anymore," he said simply. The 2 weeks that followed were the happiest of Sarah's life. Every evening after work, Gideon would be waiting for her, and they would walk together along the creek or sit on the porch of the boarding house and talk until the stars came out. He told her stories about his adventures in the wilderness, and she shared her dreams of building a life where she was valued for her mind and her skills rather than defined by her limitation. On Sunday, Gideon took her to church, and Sarah felt the eyes of the whole town on them as they sat together in the pew. She heard the whispers, saw the speculation in people's faces, but for the first time in her life, she did not care what they thought. Let them talk. Let them wonder. She was with Gideon Quinn, and that was all that mattered. After church, they went on a picnic to a meadow outside of town. Gideon spread a blanket under an oak tree, and they ate bread and cheese and apples while watching clouds drift across the sky. It was peaceful and perfect, and when Gideon pulled Sarah close and kissed her for the first time, she felt like she had finally come home. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. Gideon's lips were soft against hers, and his hand cradled the back of her head like she was something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sarah saw everything she was feeling reflected in his gray eyes. "I love you," Gideon said, the words simple and direct. "I know it has only been a week. I know people will say it is too fast, but I love you, Sarah Bryant. I love your strength and your courage. I love the way you face the world with your chin up, refusing to be diminished by other people's small-mindedness. I love the sound of your laugh and the way your eyes light up when you are excited about something. I love everything about you, and I need you to know that before I head back to the mountains." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears, tears of joy and wonder and overwhelming emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could, not this fast, not like this, but I do. I love you, Gideon Quinn." They held each other as the afternoon faded into evening, and Sarah had never felt more safe, more cherished, more completely herself than she did in Gideon's arms. But all too soon, the 2 weeks were over, and it was time for Gideon to return to his mountain cabin. He had explained that he spent the winter months trapping and hunting, laying in supplies to sell when he came back down in the spring. It was a solitary life and a hard one, but it was how he made his living. The night before he was set to leave, they sat on the porch of the boarding house, and Sarah tried to memorize every detail of his face, knowing it would have to sustain her through the long months ahead. "Come with me," Gideon said suddenly, taking her hands in his. "Marry me and come with me to the mountains." Sarah's heart leaped at the proposal, but her practical mind immediately began cataloging all the reasons it was impossible. "Gideon, I cannot. My job, my room, my whole life is here now. And your cabin, the wilderness, I would not be able to manage it with my leg." "We would make it work," Gideon insisted. "I would build you whatever you needed, do whatever it took to make you comfortable. The cabin is small but sturdy, and I could modify it, add ramps instead of steps, smooth out the paths around it. You could keep my books, manage the business side of the trapping. We would be a team, Sarah. Partners." It was so tempting, so achingly appealing, but Sarah forced herself to be realistic. What if it does not work? What if I get there and I cannot handle it, and then I have given up everything for nothing? Gideon cupped her face in his hands, his expression fierce and tender all at once. "Then we come back down. Then we find another solution. But I am not asking you to give up everything, Sarah. I am asking you to choose something new, to take a chance on us. I know I am asking a lot. I know the mountains are hard and the life is harder. But I also know that I cannot imagine spending the next 6 months without you. I cannot imagine a future that does not have you in it." Sarah felt herself wavering, felt the last of her resistance crumbling in the face of his certainty. What did she have here, really? A job she had held for 2 weeks, a room she was renting, a town where she was still a stranger. What did any of that matter compared to the man she loved, to the life they could build together? "Are you sure?" she asked, needing to hear him say it one more time. "Are you absolutely certain that you want this, that you want me, limp and all?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," Gideon said. "You walk with a limp, Sarah, but you walk straight into my heart. That is all that matters to me." The tears came then, spilling down Sarah's cheeks unchecked. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will come with you to the mountains." Gideon let out a whoop of joy and swept her up into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests and laughter. When he set her down, he was grinning like a fool, and Sarah knew she must look the same. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Quartz Hill. It was a simple ceremony in the small church, with Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Prescott standing as witnesses. Sarah wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and Gideon had somehow procured a proper suit that made him look uncomfortably civilized. But when he said his vows, his voice was strong and sure, and when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Sarah felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was her husband, her partner, her future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. After the ceremony, Mrs. Henderson hosted a small celebration at the boarding house, with cake and lemonade and well wishes from the few people Sarah had come to know during her brief time in Quartz Hill. Mr. Prescott presented them with a generous severance pay for Sarah and his genuine good wishes for their happiness. Even Miss Peters and Mrs. Carmichael seemed genuinely pleased for them, though Sarah caught a hint of concern in the schoolteacher's eyes. "Are you certain about this?" Miss Peters asked quietly when she had a moment alone with Sarah. "The mountains are no place for a lady, especially one with your condition." Sarah appreciated the concern, even as she bristled slightly at the phrasing. "I am certain," she said firmly. "Gideon and I will make it work." That night, their wedding night, Gideon carried Sarah over the threshold of his room at the boarding house, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Gideon was gentle with her, careful of her leg, but Sarah needed him to understand that she was not fragile, that she was strong enough for this, for him, for all of it. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Sarah felt a peace she had never known. This was where she belonged. Not in Ohio with her overprotective parents, not in a town where she was defined by her limp, but here, with this man who saw her for who she truly was. They left Quartz Hill at dawn 2 days later, riding side by side on sturdy mountain horses with their supplies packed on a mule. Gideon had insisted on getting Sarah a gentle mare with a smooth gait, and he had fashioned a special stirrup for her shorter leg that made riding easier and more comfortable. The journey into the mountains took 4 days, following narrow trails that climbed steadily upward through pine forests and across rushing streams. It was harder than Sarah had anticipated, the constant riding making her leg ache fiercely, but she gritted her teeth and refused to complain. She had chosen this path, and she would see it through. Gideon was endlessly patient with her, never pushing her too hard, always making sure she was comfortable before they moved on. At night, he set up camp with practiced efficiency, building a fire and cooking simple meals that tasted better than anything Sarah had eaten in town. And when she was too tired to do anything but collapse onto her bedroll, he would sit beside her and talk quietly about the land around them, pointing out constellations and telling her the stories behind their names. On the 4th day, they crested a ridge and Sarah got her first look at Gideon's cabin. It sat in a small valley surrounded by towering pines, with a creek running nearby and mountains rising in the distance. The cabin itself was small but solidly built, with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Smoke curled from the chimney, and Sarah realized with a start that someone must be inside. "I asked my trapping partner, Sam Whitehorse, to come up early and get the place ready for us," Gideon explained, seeing her confusion. "I did not want you arriving to a cold cabin and no supplies." As they rode closer, a man emerged from the cabin. He was Native American, tall and lean with long black hair and watchful dark eyes. He raised a hand in greeting and Gideon returned the gesture. "Sam," Gideon said as they dismounted. "This is my wife, Sarah." Sam's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "Wife," he repeated as if testing the word. "You work fast, my friend." "When you know, you know," Gideon said simply. He turned to Sarah. "Sam and I have been trapping together for 5 years now." He is Miwok, from a village about 20 miles east of here. He is also the best tracker in these mountains and the man who taught me everything I know about surviving up here." Sarah extended her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Sam shook it. "Welcome," he said, his English accented but clear. "Gideon has told me nothing about you, which means this is either a very good story or a very bad one." "A good one," Sarah assured him, and she saw the hint of a smile cross Sam's face. Over the next few hours, Sam helped them unload their supplies and get settled into the cabin. It was indeed small, just one main room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, and shelves for storage. There was a separate lean-to out back for storing furs and equipment. It was rustic and simple, a world away from the comfortable boarding house or her family home in Ohio. But Sarah was determined to make it work. True to his word, Gideon had already made modifications for her. The steps up to the porch had been replaced with a gentle ramp, and inside, everything was arranged so that she could reach it easily without having to navigate obstacles. He had even built a sturdy chair with armrests that made it easier for her to stand up when her leg was particularly stiff. Sam left before nightfall, promising to return in a few days to begin the trapping season with Gideon. After he was gone, Sarah and Gideon stood on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "What do you think?" Gideon asked, his arm around her waist. "Can you be happy here?" Sarah looked around at the wild beauty surrounding them, at the cabin that was now her home, at the man who loved her enough to share his world with her. "I can be happy anywhere with you," she said honestly. "But yes, I think I can be happy here. It is beautiful, Gideon. Hard but beautiful. Like you," he said, turning her to face him. "Beautiful and strong and perfect." That first winter in the mountains tested Sarah in ways she had never imagined. The cold was fierce, the snow deep, and the isolation complete. Some days her leg hurt so badly she could barely walk, and she had to force herself to move through the pain. Other days, she felt trapped in the small cabin, desperate for company and conversation and the simple comforts of civilization. But there were also moments of incredible beauty and joy. There were mornings when she woke to find the world transformed by fresh snow, everything pure and pristine. There were evenings by the fire when Gideon would read aloud from their small collection of books, his deep voice bringing stories to life. There were nights when they made love by firelight, their bodies learning each other with increasing familiarity and passion. And there was the work. Gideon had been right about Sarah keeping the books and managing the business side of the trapping operation. She had a natural head for numbers and organization, and she quickly developed a system for tracking their inventory, recording their catches, and calculating the profits they could expect when they sold their furs in the spring. Sam became a regular visitor, stopping by every few days to check on them and coordinate with Gideon about their trap lines. At first, he was reserved around Sarah, clearly uncertain about having a woman in their camp, especially one with a visible disability. But Sarah won him over through sheer determination, proving that she could contribute to the operation even if she could not physically run the trap lines herself. It was Sarah who suggested they expand their operation to include other products beyond furs. She knew from her father's store that there was a market for wild herbs and roots, for certain types of bark and pine nuts, for all sorts of things that could be harvested from the mountains. With Sam's knowledge of native plants and her business acumen, they began collecting and drying these items to sell alongside the furs. By the time spring arrived and the snow began to melt, they had amassed an impressive inventory. Gideon and Sam packed it all carefully onto mules and the three of them made the journey back down to Quartz Hill. The town had changed little in the 6 months Sarah had been gone, but she had changed enormously. She was stronger now, both physically and mentally. The constant activity of mountain life had strengthened her muscles and improved her balance. Her limp was still there, would always be there, but it troubled her less. She had learned to work within her limitations, to find creative solutions rather than giving up, and she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had never been before. The people of Quartz Hill noticed the change in her immediately. When she walked down the street beside Gideon, she held her head high, her confidence evident in every step. When the whispers started, she ignored them, secure in the knowledge that the opinions of strangers meant nothing compared to the love of her husband. They sold their goods for an excellent price, far more than Gideon and Sam had ever made on their own. Mr. Prescott was particularly interested in the herbs and roots, offering to be a regular buyer if they could maintain a steady supply. Other merchants expressed similar interest, and Sarah realized that they had stumbled onto something potentially very profitable. That night, in their room at the boarding house, Sarah and Gideon lay together and talked about the future. The cabin was perfect for just the two of them, but if they were going to expand their operation, they would need more space. And Sarah had another reason for wanting to expand, though she had not yet told Gideon. "I am with child," she said quietly, her hand on her still flat stomach. "I suspected it last month, but now I am sure." Gideon's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with wonder and joy, and he pulled her close, his hand covering hers on her belly. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Gideon said fervently. "You have given me everything, Sarah. A home, a partner, a purpose beyond just surviving, and now a child. I do not have words for what that means to me." They talked long into the night about their plans. They would expand the cabin, adding a separate bedroom and more storage space. They would hire help for the heavier work, so that Sarah would not have to strain herself during the pregnancy. They would make sure she had access to a doctor, and that they could get down to town quickly if there were any complications. "I know having a baby in the mountains is not ideal," Gideon said worriedly. "Maybe we should consider staying in town, at least until the child is born." But Sarah shook her head firmly. "The cabin is our home. That is where I want our child to be born. Besides, Sam's sister is a midwife. He has mentioned her before. I am sure she would be willing to help when the time comes." Over the next few months, they threw themselves into preparing for the baby. Gideon and Sam worked tirelessly to expand the cabin, adding a new room and improving the existing structure. Sarah sewed baby clothes and blankets, her hands busy even as her belly grew. Sam's sister, a capable woman named Morning Star, came to visit and pronounced Sarah healthy and strong. She agreed to be present for the birth and gave Sarah herbs to help with the various discomforts of pregnancy. The baby was born on a cold January morning, coming into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the cabin. It was a boy, perfect and healthy, with his father's gray eyes and a tuft of dark hair. They named him Gabriel, and Gideon held his son with a mixture of awe and terror, his large hands impossibly gentle as he cradled the tiny infant. "He is perfect," Gideon whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Sarah, he is absolutely perfect." Sarah, exhausted but elated, reached up to touch her husband's cheek. "We made him," she said wonderingly. "You and me, we made this perfect little person." The next few years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Gabriel grew into a sturdy, adventurous toddler who loved the mountains as much as his father did. When he was 2, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, a quiet baby with her mother's green eyes and sunny disposition. 2 years after that came another son, named Samuel in honor of Gideon's partner, who had become like family to them. The business continued to thrive, expanding beyond anything Sarah had initially imagined. They now employed several local people to help with harvesting and processing, and they had established regular trade routes to several towns throughout California. Gideon still spent time trapping, but increasingly he focused on managing the operation and spending time with his growing family. Sarah's leg continued to limit her in some ways, but she had long since stopped seeing it as a disability and started viewing it simply as part of who she was. Her children grew up never knowing a time when their mother was defined by her limp, and they accepted it as naturally as they accepted the color of her eyes or the sound of her laugh. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gideon took Sarah to the meadow where they had shared their first kiss. It was summer, and wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of color. Their children were with Morning Star for the day, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked as they sat together on a blanket, watching clouds drift across the sky. "Giving up town life, living in the mountains, all of it." Sarah turned to look at her husband, at the man who had seen past her limp to the person beneath, who had loved her when she had thought herself unlovable, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. His hair was longer now, streaked with gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting against the sun. But to her, he was as handsome as the day they met, and she loved him more with each passing year. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, Gideon. A home, a family, work that matters, and most importantly, you. You saw me when everyone else saw only my limitation. You loved me when I had forgotten how to love myself. How could I ever regret that?" Gideon pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. "They said you walked with a limp," Gideon murmured against her hair. "And you do. But you also walked straight into my heart, Sarah Quinn, and you have been there ever since." "And you walked into mine," Sarah replied, turning to kiss him. The mountain man who saw past the broken parts to the whole person underneath. The man who gave me back my life. They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking and laughing and remembering all the years they had shared. And when they finally made their way back to the cabin, it was to find their children waiting on the porch, Gabriel holding Grace's hand while little Samuel toddled around collecting pine cones. This was their life, Sarah thought as she watched Gideon scoop up Samuel and ruffle Gabriel's hair while Grace demanded a story. This was the future she had never dared to dream of, the happiness she had thought forever beyond her reach. And it had all started with a man who looked at her and saw not her limp, but her heart. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Gabriel grew into a young man as strong and capable as his father, equally at home in the mountains and in town. He had inherited Gideon's natural way with animals and his mother's head for business, and Sarah knew he would do well whatever path he chose in life. Grace became a teacher, traveling down to Quartz Hill each fall to help Miss Peters, who was now quite elderly, with the growing number of students. She had her mother's determination and her father's protective instinct, and she was beloved by the children she taught. Samuel proved to have an unexpected talent for healing, learning everything he could from Morning Star about herbs and medicine. He talked about going to medical school someday, about becoming a real doctor who could help people in the remote mountain communities where physicians rarely ventured. Sarah and Gideon were enormously proud of all their children, watching them grow into capable, compassionate adults who contributed to their community in meaningful ways. The business they had built together continued to thrive, providing employment for dozens of people and bringing prosperity to the region. On Sarah's 50th birthday, the whole family gathered at the cabin, which had been expanded several more times over the years and was now a sprawling, comfortable home. Gabriel had brought his wife and their 2 children. Grace had come up from town with Miss Peters in tow, and Samuel was there with his new medical books and his plans for the future. As Sarah looked around at the faces of the people she loved most in the world, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off the stagecoach in Quartz Hill all those years ago, frightened and alone and convinced that her life was over before it had truly begun. That young woman could never have imagined this future, could never have dreamed that the mountain man who defended her from a bully's cruelty would become the love of her life, her partner, her everything. She could never have imagined the children they would raise, the business they would build, the life they would create together in these wild mountains. Gideon caught her eye from across the room, where he was showing his granddaughter how to carve a whistle from a piece of pine. He smiled at her, that same smile that had captured her heart 32 years ago, and mouthed the words, "I love you." Sarah smiled back, her heart full to overflowing. "I love you too," she mouthed in return. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah and Gideon sat on the porch and watched the stars. It had become their ritual over the years, this quiet time together at the end of each day, and Sarah cherished it. "You remember the day we met?" Gideon asked, taking her hand in his. "When you fell on the boardwalk and Dalton mocked you." "I remember," Sarah said. "I remember wanting to disappear, to be anywhere but there. I remember thinking that coming to Quartz Hill had been a terrible mistake." "And then," Gideon prompted. "And then you punched him in the face," Sarah said with a laugh. "And you told me that I walked straight into your heart, and my whole life changed in that moment." "Our whole lives changed," Gideon corrected. "I was just existing before you, Sarah. Going through the motions of living without really feeling anything. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be more than just a man alone in the mountains." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, hearts full. After 50 years of living, 32 of them as Gideon's wife, Sarah had learned that the greatest moments in life were often the quietest ones. The simple pleasure of sitting beside the person you loved and knowing that you were exactly where you belonged. "They still say it, you know," Sarah said eventually. "When I go into town, I still hear the whispers. She walks with a limp, as if I do not know, as if it is the most important thing about me." "And what do you say to that?" Gideon asked, though she knew he already knew the answer. "I say let them talk," Sarah replied firmly. "I might walk with a limp, but I walked straight into the heart of the best man I have ever known. I walked into a life richer and fuller than anything I ever imagined. I walked into happiness and love and purpose. So yes, I walk with a limp. And I would not change a single step of the journey that brought me here." Gideon raised her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. "You always have been from that very first day. That is what I saw in you, Sarah. Not your limp, not your limitation, but your absolutely unbreakable spirit. That is what I fell in love with, and that is what I have loved every single day since." More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. Miss Peters passed away peacefully in her sleep, and Grace took over the school completely. Sam Whitehorse grew old and eventually decided to retire, handing over his share of the business to Samuel, who had decided that being a mountain healer was more important than going away to medical school. Gabriel and his family moved into a cabin nearby, wanting to stay close to his aging parents while building his own life. Gideon's hair turned fully silver, and the years of hard mountain living caught up with him in the form of aching joints and a back that was not as strong as it once was. But his spirit remained undiminished, and his love for Sarah never wavered. Sarah's leg caused her more trouble as she aged, arthritis settling into the old injury and making movement increasingly difficult. There were days when she needed a cane to get around, days when the pain was so severe that she could barely walk at all. But she faced these new challenges with the same determination she had faced everything else in her life, refusing to let her limitations define her. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren threw them a celebration in town. It seemed like everyone in Quartz Hill turned out for the occasion, testament to the respect and affection the community had for the Quinn family. People made speeches about how Sarah and Gideon had contributed to the town's prosperity, how they had provided jobs and opportunity, how they had raised fine children who were assets to the community. But the moment Sarah treasured most came at the end of the evening when an elderly woman approached her. Sarah recognized her as one of the women who had whispered about her that first day in Quartz Hill, all those years ago. "I owe you an apology," the woman said quietly. "When you first arrived, I was one of the people who judged you for your limp. I thought you would not last here, that you would be a burden. I was wrong about you, Mrs. Quinn. Dead wrong. You are one of the strongest women I have ever known, and this town is better for having you in it." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "That means more to me than you know." After the woman walked away, Gideon wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist. "You have proved them all wrong," he said with pride. "Every single person who ever doubted you, who ever saw your limp before they saw you. You proved that strength has nothing to do with how you walk and everything to do with who you are inside." Sarah leaned into her husband's embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady strength that had been her anchor for 4 decades. "We proved it together," she corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, Gideon. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You saw possibilities where I saw only limitations. You loved me into becoming the person I was always meant to be." They danced that night, moving slowly to the music in a way that accommodated Sarah's limited mobility, but felt perfect nonetheless. Gideon held her close, and Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Around them, their children and grandchildren danced too, and the whole scene was so perfect, so exactly right, that Sarah wished she could freeze this moment forever. As the years advanced and Gideon and Sarah entered their 70s, they began spending more time in town and less time at the mountain cabin. The journey up and down had become too difficult for Sarah, and Gideon refused to be separated from her. They bought a small house in Quartz Hill, close enough to the mountains that Gideon could still see them from his porch, but comfortable and easy for Sarah to navigate. Gabriel took over the mountain operation completely, running it with the same dedication and innovation his parents had shown. Grace continued teaching, now with the help of her own daughter. Samuel established a clinic in town, becoming the doctor he had always wanted to be, serving the mountain communities with skill and compassion. Gideon and Sarah settled into a peaceful retirement, spending their days tending a small garden, receiving visits from their ever-growing family, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had been married for nearly 50 years, and their love had only deepened with time, mellowing into something comfortable and enduring. On a warm summer evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Gideon turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" he asked. "After Dalton mocked you, you said many things that day," Sarah replied with a smile, Which particular words are you thinking of? I said that you walked straight into my heart, Gideon said softly. And it is as true today as it was then, Sarah. More true, if that is possible. You have been in my heart for nearly 50 years now, and you will be there until the day I die and beyond. Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture as familiar as breathing. And you in mine, she said. Always and forever, Gideon Quinn. You are my heart, my home, my everything. They sat together as the light faded from the sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Sarah thought about all the years that had passed, all the challenges they had overcome, all the joy they had shared. She thought about the young woman she had been, stepping off that stage coach with fear and hope warring in her heart. If she could go back and tell that young woman what the future held, would she believe it? Would she believe that the mountain man who defended her would become the love of her life? Would she believe that her limp, the thing she saw as her greatest weakness, would lead her to her greatest strength? Probably not, but that was all right. Some things had to be lived to be understood, had to be experienced to be believed. What are you thinking about? Gideon asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. I am thinking about how grateful I am, Sarah said honestly, for all of it. The good and the bad, the easy and the hard. Every step of this journey, even the painful ones, led me here, led me to you, and I would not change a single thing. Not even the accident, Gideon asked gently. Not even the limp, Sarah considered the question carefully. The accident had caused her so much pain, so much suffering. It had changed the entire trajectory of her life, closing off paths she had once thought open to her. But it had also led her here, to this man, to this life, to this profound happiness. Not even that, she said finally. Because without it, I might never have left Ohio. I might never have come to Quartz Hill. I might never have met you. And a life without you, Gideon, is not a life I want to imagine. Gideon pulled her close, and they sat together in the gathering darkness, hearts beating in synchrony, two souls that had found their perfect match. They had walked a long road together, Sarah with her limp and Gideon with his unwavering devotion, and they had built something beautiful along the way. As the stars began to appear in the sky above, Sarah felt a peace settle over her that went soul deep. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not perfection, not the absence of challenges or pain, but this. Being with the person you loved, having lived a life of purpose and meaning, knowing that you had made a difference in the world. They stayed on the porch until the night grew cool, reluctant to leave the magic of the moment. When they finally went inside, Gideon helped Sarah to her feet with the same gentle care he had shown her for nearly 50 years. They moved slowly through their evening routine, comfortable in their long-established patterns. In bed, Sarah curled against Gideon's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. This, too, was familiar, this nightly ritual of finding each other in the darkness, of falling asleep in each other's arms. "Good night, my love," Gideon murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Good night," Sarah replied, her voice already drowsy. "I love you, Gideon Quinn. Today, tomorrow, and always. And I love you, Sarah Quinn, my beautiful, courageous, perfect wife, the woman who walked straight into my heart and changed my life forever." Sarah smiled in the darkness, her heart full. She had been that woman once upon a time. The woman people pitied, the woman they whispered about, the woman they defined by her limitation. But Gideon had seen past all of that to the person beneath, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be fully, completely herself. They drifted off to sleep together, as they had done thousands of times before, secure in the knowledge that they would wake up side by side, ready to face another day together. And in the years that remained to them, however many or few those might be, they would continue to walk through life together. Sarah with her limp and Gideon with his love. Two people who had found in each other everything they had ever needed. The story of Sarah and Gideon Quinn became something of a legend in Quartz Hill, told and retold over the years until it took on the quality of myth. People spoke of the mountain man who had defended a limping stranger and ended up marrying her, of the woman who had overcome her disability to build a thriving business in the wilderness, of a love that had lasted through nearly 50 years and counting. But to Sarah and Gideon, it was not a legend or a myth. It was simply their life, lived one day at a time, one step at a time, one heartbeat at a time. It was real and messy and beautiful and hard and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. And when people said, as they still sometimes did, "She walks with a limp," there was always someone nearby to respond, "Yes, and she walked straight into the heart of the best man this town has ever known, and together they built something extraordinary." Because that was the truth of it, the simple, beautiful truth. Sarah might walk with a limp, but she had walked a remarkable journey, and she had walked it with love and courage and an indomitable spirit that inspired everyone who knew her. And Gideon, the mountain man who saw past the surface to the soul beneath, who loved fiercely and completely and without reservation, had walked beside her every step of the way, proving that true love sees not with the eyes but with the heart. Together, they had walked into a future neither could have predicted, and they had made it beautiful. Together, they had proved that the way a person walks matters far less than where they are walking and who walks beside them. Together, they had built a love story for the ages, one that would be remembered long after they were gone, a testament to the power of seeing past limitations to possibilities, past disability to ability, past the limp to the heart. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy of Sarah and Gideon Quinn. A reminder that love, real love, sees everything and chooses to love anyway, that the greatest journeys begin with a single step, and that sometimes the straightest path to happiness is the one that walks right into another person's heart.